Thank you, Tom. Thank you for coming. I don't know if any of that qualifies me as a historian. I don't think it does. That's why my son, who I worked with on this, said, Dad, you're just kind of a citizen and you're obsessed, so we'll call you the obsessed historian. So I think the difference between obsession and passion changed somewhere in the, actually I did the math this morning, it's been 47 years since I've been coming down to Moonville. So somewhere in those 47 years, it was a passion and then became an obsession. So I think we're probably at the obsession stage of this whole thing. So how I got involved in this, which, well, I live in Columbus. I still live in Columbus. I'm a city boy, went to Ohio State. Somewhere along the line, I went on a camping trip down here to Lake Hope, never heard of it. Vinton County, never heard of it. I do now, I'm good now. It was just a camping trip with a guy, and I'll never forget, it was a Friday night, it was in the winter time, there's 5 inches of snow on the ground, and we get out and we walk around aimlessly for an hour or so, set up the campfire, do the tent, whatever, get up the next morning, I can still see the car. We had literally gone around in a circle for 2 hours. And I go, this is great. Okay, now what do we do? Where are we gonna go? Well, we had a brochure from Lake Hope and a couple different points of interest, but one of them was this place called Moonville. It's like, let's go there. I talked about a ghost and a tunnel, and let's just walk there. So this is 1977 when we did that, and we just kind of stumbled on Moonville, and yeah, this is kind of neat. There was a tunnel, and of course the railroad track was there at the time. So this is great. Okay, life goes on, I go back to school, everything else. Probably the next quarter, maybe 2 quarters later, I took an English folklore class. And one of the assignments was to pick out a topic of your interest and, kind of bring a folklore component to it. So like Moonville, this is perfect, right? Because no one really knew anything about it. You had this ghost component to it, like this is a no-brainer, this is great. However, think back to 1977 for those of you, some of you can. There's no internet, there's nothing in the libraries. There was virtually nothing about this place called Moonville, anywhere. So I had to do it the old-fashioned way, and I went around and I talked to people. I knocked on doors. I'm not so sure I would do that in today's world. I might get shot first, but I went around and I knocked on doors, and they said, hey, I'm a young student, and I'm doing a paper on Moonville, and what do you know about Moonville? So I wrote this paper back in 1977, and the title of it was Over There, I Think, because everybody I talked to gave me a different story about where it was and who was there, because if you've been to Moonville in recent years, there is nothing there. You would not know you were there except for the tunnel, right? There's nothing there. So it was a great exercise, and 40 pages later, I look back on this and I'm kind of proud of it because, again, there was no internet, there was no help. There was just going around, talking to people, piecing it together. And that was just kind of the start of the passions. Like, I kind of liked this place and Raccoon Creek, and it was kind of intriguing and so different than Columbus, right? Just a different, just get away and do that. I pretty much drug everyone I ever knew down there with me to see it, including my wife, and we were engaged on the banks of the Raccoon Creek in 1982. So I've been going down there for a long time. There's a long history with me going down there. The Moonville was part of the Marietta and Cincinnati Railroad, which came through Athens, right? Started in Marietta, went to Cincinnati. The Coe family was the first family to pioneer this area, and it marvels me, and to this day, they were from New York State, Western New York State. They had 9 children, and for some reason, we'll never know, probably, they got in their wagon. That's not them, by the way. They got in the wagon with their 9 children and headed west and ended up by hook or by crook in Athens County and then what is now Moonville. A lot of people in that time frame migrated from Western New York, went up to Cleveland in that area, Cleveland, Akron, that kind of northeast Ohio, which made more sense. These guys ended up in what became Vinton County. So I'm just picturing, if you've been to Moonville, or just picture the woods, and you're there with 9 children, and you pull up, and it's like, we're here. Like, we're where? No, we're here. This is our land. They homesteaded it along with the Ferguson family, and it later on became Moonville, but not at the beginning. This is just kind of, I don't want to do rail history today, But the Marietta and Cincinnati Railroad really was somewhat affiliated with Baltimore and Ohio. And the whole goal was to get to Cincinnati, right? This was the 1830s, 1840s. There was a race to get to Cincinnati and then beyond because our young country was expanding. There wasn't a whole lot of money, but there was a whole lot of land. And canal fever, which was all the rage in the 1820s, right? Hey, I have land, I have stuff, I need to get it to market, I want a canal. And towns used to fight over where the canals went, right? I need a canal in my backyard. There are a lot of stories about that, a lot of money, a lot of bond issues and this and that, and fighting between cities. But then the railroad came along. Oh, I want one of those. I'd rather be by the railroad. So there was this whole competition for having the railroad in your backyard or somewhere where you could get your goods to marketplace. So the Marietta and Cincinnati Railroad was started kind of in Marietta. Actually, corporate headquarters, if you will, were in Chillicothe. And this map is from 1875. This company, this publishing company, this gentleman did Athens County, Vinton County. Maybe he did every county in the state. I don't know. But this is the most valuable piece of history we have, in my mind, because of the time it was done. There's Moonville Station very clear. I actually got a clicker here, right? Moonville Station obviously is right there. Ingham Station, I'll talk about in a minute, was up there to the right. Hope Furnace. Zaleski would be down here, if you will. Athens is that way, if you will. King Station was the next one over, and then Mineral, and then eventually Athens. I'm pointing to places that, just kind of bear with me on that. So here is the Coe family we talked about. Lucius Coe was the landowner, and the Fergusons, they own this spot here. The Moonville Tunnel is right here. This is tunnel. That's where the Moonville Tunnel was. So, and still is. Okay. That is what a rail locomotive looked like in the 1850s and 60s. They went maybe 20, 30 miles an hour. Wasn't a big deal. When they first started, they didn't have locomotives. They just had horses and mules pull the cars. Obviously, as modernization took place, they got faster, they got bigger, they got better. I have this theory, it's so true, that follow the money kind of works probably for all time. So a lot of these guys that were involved with the railroad somehow also became landowners right along the way. Amazing coincidence. And some of these people have ancestors that were very famous. This is Douglas Putnam, who owned a tremendous amount of land there. His grandfather was second in command to General Washington during the American Revolutionary War. He's one of the main characters. This is William P. Cutler. He was the president of the Marietta and Cincinnati Railroad. His grandfather was Manasseh Cutler, who was very involved in the land ordinance, the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. So he was involved in that, president of the railroad. This is, I don't have a picture of Zaleski, but if you've heard of Zaleski, it's just a little town, not much left of it. But that is in Vinton County also, and he was a Polish banker. The railroad had no money. They were going bankrupt before they even started. They sent the president to Europe to go around and beg for money, and he came across this old Polish banker, Peter Zaleski, and he was intrigued by the mineral aspect of the whole. Okay, you got rail, you got commercial, you got passenger, you got minerals. You got coal, you got timber, you got iron ore. So he gave them $1 million or so, named a town after himself. Never came to Zaleski, but they built a castle for him anyway. It's now gone, by the way. And then I showed you Ingham back here. Let me go back a minute to show you okay. Ingham Station's over there to the far right. You see Moonville, you see Ingham Station. So there was, and this is as historians, or wannabe historians, as I am anyway, sometimes when you come across something no one has found before, excitement may be not the right adjective, but it's intriguing to me. I can read about World War II, and there's been 15,000 books written about World War II. I am not going to discover anything about World War II. I might for me, but I'm not for the world. So Ingham also owned a paper mill in Chillicothe. You probably know it as Mead. It's not Mead today, it's called Pixel, but we grew up with Mead in Chillicothe, right? That was the paper mill. Well, Mr. Ingham, who lived in Chillicothe, ironically knew all these other guys, followed the money, right? Bought land right where Ingham Station is, named it after himself, But what does a paper mill need? It needs timber, it needs coal. It's all right there, and you need a rail track. It's all right there. So that's how Ingham Station was born, which is now gone. It's a ghost town also. But this is actually kind of a cool picture that the people over in Ross County redid for me. But there's a square there in the middle, if you can see, that's Mr. Ingham. And there's a gentleman here, you can see, if you notice, he has a wooden peg leg. And this was taken in 1876. I would guess he's a Civil War veteran. I don't know that, we'll never know that, but I'm just guessing he probably was. Okay, so this is one of the Coes, C-O-E. This is the original family that came in from the east and settled what became Moonville. This is Lucius Coe. He actually spent most of his life in Athens, or Shade. I don't know where Shade is. I think it's south of Athens a little bit. He and his brother Samuel, but there are no pictures of Samuel, so we're just going to have to use him as a role model, I guess. One thing that comes up quite a bit as you read about Moonville, if you were to get out your computer and type in Moonville, you're going to get pretty much the same thing. I think people just kind of copy after each other. A man named Samuel Coe, Lucius's brother, offered a large portion of his land to the railroad company for free as long as the rail line was routed through his land in order to haul out coal and clay. The railroad agreed to Coe's offer as it reduced the distance to Cincinnati. Okay, so I'm going to come back to the next one here in a minute. The fact of the matter is, back then, everybody wanted the railroad to go through their land. Everybody wanted that way to get to the marketplace. So I'm not so sure, folklore, I'm not so sure, because folklore is he got on his horse in 1849 and he rode to Chillicothe and he convinced the railroad to move the railroad through his property. Well, the railroad line is 177 miles long, and there's a whole lot of creeks and valleys and mountains and hills, and I'm not so sure that's actually true. It makes for a good story. I think it was just convenient to go through his property, and pretty much these guys were giving their land away for free of the right-of-ways. They wanted that to happen. But I'm often asked, and I read all the time, that Moonville, how did it get its name? Right? How did it get its name? Okay. Several small towns popped up, including the mining town of Moonville, named for the man who operated the town store, Mr. Moon. Great story, right? Got to be. Okay, so again, kind of intrigued by this. You know, I keep inventing ways, my wife will tell you this, keep inventing ways to keep focused on this kind of stuff. So I've looked in the census of 1830, 1840, 1850. The town was formed right around 1850 or so. There wasn't a Mr. Moon that lived anywhere in Vinton County. There was no Mr. Moon that lived in any county that I could find anywhere around. It just didn't make sense to me. I think it could be something as simple as somebody walked out one night and just saw a bright moon, and we got a post office coming in, we need to name it, let's call it Moonville. Cool, let's go with that. So that was my line, that's what I had convinced myself of. Then just this year, I'm in the Vinton County Courthouse, and I'm going through old, thick, dusty, hard to read, annoying books, and I came across that. That is a lease with Lucius Coe, who I showed you earlier, right? And Eliakim's H. Moon. There it is. There it is. I was so excited. I mean, this is the dumbest thing ever. The poor clerk in Vinton County there, she was like, what? I said, I went through this whole Moonville story and the whole moon thing and the whole, oh, my daughter loves to go there. I was so excited about this. But I knew in the back of my mind that I had to run home to Ancestry.com and make sure this person really existed, because back then, the older people here know cursive. It had its own little nuances and stuff. Well, sadly, upon examination, it was not Moon, it was Moore, M-O-O-R-E. And he actually lived in Athens, and actually was a pretty famous person. I've done research on him. You can look him up. He's on Wikipedia. He was an attorney. I think he was a state assemblyman, and he went around and bought up a lot of property. But I thought for a moment, like, I found the elusive Mr. Moon. It wasn't, anyway. You find things. Okay, so let me make sure, let me just check what I'm doing here. By the way, instead of me staying here lecturing the whole time, if you have questions, feel free. I'm more of a conversationalist than I am a lecturer. Mr. Moon, okay, we did that. Okay, so now Moonville. I give my son credit. You see a period at the end of Moonville. If you ever go to the Moonville tunnel, when they did this, the railroad, there actually is a period there at the end of Moonville. I don't know if someone was trying to be stylistic or not, but that was kind of cool. But the town died and the tunnel did not. The town is gone. Ingham Station's gone. Hope is gone. King Station's gone. They're all gone. Minerals still there. Zaleski's still there. Not what they were once upon a time. That's about the best picture I have of the Moonville Tunnel. That the oldest picture that I have. People back then didn't have cameras. They didn't have money. Why would you take a picture of a tunnel? There's no pictures I've ever seen in the 1800s of what the tunnel was, which is significant because it's not what it looked like today. How do we know that? Well, I went to the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, who's a predecessor of the Marietta and Cincinnati Railroad, and there was a book that they have of the diagrams of all the tunnels. Now, I'm not an engineer. It doesn't look like a blueprint that I could build a tunnel from. But what they did is, in the early 1900s, this tunnel was built in 1855. Okay. So about 50 years later, they were falling apart already. And you can read up there for yourself. This was done in 1903, this evaluation of the tunnel. Original walls, portals, and arch were stone and badly disintegrated. Portals, walls, and arch were reinforced with brick in 1903. So what you see today, if you were to go to Moonville Tunnel, is not what it looked like in the 1850s. They were just kind of, not winging it, but they were just doing the best they could based on what they knew at the time. And it was a slow, arduous process. It was able to go for 50 years, but after 50 years, they were falling apart. So what was stone now became brick, right? I mean, so that made it more sturdy and is going to last longer. How do we know it was repaired in 1903? Okay, forget the modern spray paint. It was repaired in 1903 by those gentlemen there. We have records of that. I do want to point out to you, I'll go back to this in a minute. This tunnel, back in the 1850s, there was no dynamite. There was no nitroglycerin. There was no great way to build tunnels. And this is one of 4 in Vinton County. I assume there's some in Athens. I don't really know that. But there's 4 tunnels just similar to this in Vinton County. It was a very, very hard, slow thing to do. And I wanted to read. Tom mentioned earlier I did the National Register registration, which is another 40-page document I came up with. But I just wanted to read to you because I don't have this memorized. This is just one paragraph on building the tunnel in the 1850s. The Moonville Tunnel, like many tunnels constructed in the mid-19th century, was built by drilling holes with a sledgehammer into existing rock and packing the holes with black gunpowder. The drilling of one single hole could take up to 3 hours using a 3-man crew. 9 to 10 holes, each 36 inches in length, were often made before blasting. 1 pound of explosive black powder wrapped in paper was pushed into each hole and tamped down with a fuse added. The detonation of the explosives caused rocks to break and collapse. The rubble was then removed by man and mule. Progress was slow, about 1 to 2 feet per day. Modern construction and demolition technologies like nitroglycerin, dynamite, rock drills, and steam excavators were not available until the 1860s, so the original construction of the Moonville Tunnel did not benefit from these advances in tunnel technology. Construction of the Moonville Tunnel in 1855 was arduous and dangerous business, unregulated by safety standards or guidelines. It was not unusual for people to die during the building of these tunnels at all. And I've read stories of literally they drill these holes, they put the black powder in there, and they'd light it and have a fast runner try and run away before the things blew up. And sometimes guys lose a step or they trip or bad things could happen. But it's always a marvel to me, even when I go there today and I look at it, just to think about how hard this was for these people to do. And I said, this is one of 4 tunnels in Vinton County. It was very expensive also, which kind of led to some other problems that the Marietta and Cincinnati Railroad had later because it cost so much to build this railroad. Okay, so I talked about the National Registry. I did want to talk about that for a minute. Has anyone had any experience with the National Registry before? Deanna, have you or any? Okay. So in the Moonville Rail Trail, which I am a proud member, someone suggested, hey, we need to get the tunnel into the National Registry to give it some protection and give it some, okay, all right, I'll do it. Not having any idea, none, what this was going to be about. We went to the Ohio Connection, Ohio History Center, got the forms and everything, and it's like, man, this is, all right. Literally, it's a government document, right? So it's 35 pages of stuff you got to fill out. So you have to get approved for the project, got approved for the project, and I started in on it. And it probably took a year, probably. You know, I do other things, right? Much to my family's dismay, I actually do other things besides this. But I was kind of focused on this and wanted to get it done, and I got into it, and all the pictures and all the forms and all this stuff you got to do, and I turned it in, and I was all proud. Good job. They sent it back about a week later, and I felt like I was in 7th grade, and the English teacher hated my paper, and there was red paint all over it, wrong, 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 F, you know. Everything I did was not that good. I was very disappointed. And they sent me back, they said, now here's what it's supposed to look like. And I read that, and I thought, wow, that's really good, that's really good. It occurred to me, and I didn't know it till later, that this is like an industry. It's an industry, it's a business to get your property into the National Registry if you're an owner of some buildings here in Athens, let's just say, and you want it to go into the National Registry because maybe they're older, and it's more valuable if it's that way. So when I went before the board, this is later on down the road, I started noticing I was competing with, in effect, architects and preservation groups and historical societies and companies, and I'm just a guy. I'm the citizen historian, right, who hadn't written a paper in 45 years, right? This isn't something that you just kind of keep with you forever. So I rewrote the paper. They wanted more of a component to what was the tunnel made of, how did it come to being, and who do you find to talk to about a rail tunnel that was built in the 1850s, right? That's not a big audience. I found a guy in Denver who wrote a book on rail tunnels, and he was pretty cooperative until I wore him out, and then I think he was done with me. But anyway, so we finally got this approved. We had to go before a 17 governor-appointed board at the Ohio Connection. They have historians and architects and engineers and all kinds of people on this board. So any property you have has to go before this board. This was during COVID. And so it was on Zoom, and you know we were these were all the people that were up for consideration. They only do it a couple times a year. We were 6th in line, so I had to sit through the first 5, and they're all, if you look, they were historic districts and a house and another historic district and another Ford Motor. I mean, it's just, and then they came to the Moonville Tunnel, and then I could just sense there was some excitement among the members, like this is something different. This is something kind of cool. I did research on every one of the 17 board members, where they go to school, what's their background, because I wanted to be prepared. I was ready for them. They never asked me a question, but I was ready for them anyway. And we got approved, and we're very proud of that, and now it's in the National Registry, and it was a great exercise, but I'm telling you, when you haven't written a paper in 45 years, to sit down and try and write a paper again was a bit of a task. But the first one was an F, but then I came back, and I got an A. I just want to share this with you. This is actually the King's Tunnel, which is in Athens County, right? As you probably know, Vinton County was not a county until 1850. It was part of Athens County. So the difference between Moonville and the King's Station here area is not very far. It's just about a couple miles. So this is in Athens County, and I just think that's a great picture, right? There's very few pictures that exist like this. You'll also notice, if you can, that tunnel is made out of timber. Not stone, not brick. And I believe the reason is just because if you look above, it's all rock, so the foundation's there. They just needed to tunnel through it and some way to secure it. Again, this is just kind of another picture in the area, not necessarily Moonville, but I love that picture. I found it in someone's box. They were probably going to throw it away, and they gave it to me. That is in Hope. Hope is right where Lake Hope is. Just down the street, if you will. And to me, that looks like you got the owner, you got the general manager, and you got the foreman. I don't know that. I have no way of knowing that, but that's just what it looks like to me. And that was an example of a little coal mine back then, back in the day. So I'm going to talk about Moonville now for a minute, for the town. And then we will get to the ghost, I promise you. But if you wanted a ghost presentation, I'm not the paranormal guy, I'm the history guy. But we'll talk about the ghost in a minute. So when people go to Moonville, so often they'll say, well, where was it? Where was it? You're standing in it. Like, really? Yeah. Because they have a perception of the Old West. Where was the saloon? Where was the bank? Where was the hotel? Where was the blacksmith? Where was the jail? No, and no. That's not what it was. It was a collection of homes, maybe 10 or 15 homes, scattered about in the area that housed maybe 7 to 10 people, because apparently there was about 100 people in the area. That's how you get to 100. So get that out of your mind. That's not what it was. That's what it was. That is the home that was right at the intersection of Hope Moonville Road, what it is now, and where the railroad was. The railroad came running right to the right of the house. I mean, like 50 feet to the right of the house. And the Coes lived there. It was a pretty big house. They had boarders. There were other houses in the area. All there was in Moonville, all there was, despite everybody talking about it and all the fanfare, was there's a cemetery, there's a tunnel, there was a store, there was a post office, the tunnel. That was it. That was Moonville. That's all there was. Hope was bigger. Mineral was bigger. King Station was bigger. Ingham was bigger. They were all bigger than Moonville. But Moonville's got the cool name and the cool ghost. So after these people left, again, a very, very rare picture. We're very glad to have that. This is about 10 years later. The Coes moved out. They moved to Canada. And the Kennards moved in. And this is the Kennard family who moved in about 1910 or so. And I love that picture, Amzie Kennard and his wife Charlotte. And here's a picture of them, which is a classic picture. Apparently they finished second in the cornflakes cereal box contest. Those of you who are older like we are remember that we grew up with the picture on the right on cornflakes boxes. This reminds me of that. This is among the most rare pictures that I have. The Coe family graciously gave it to me. That is a picture of the Moonville Rail Depot. The only picture that exists that I know of that was probably taken in the very early 1900s. By then it was just a three-sided building, I was told. It wasn't what it was back in the 1860s, 70s, and 80s. But that's just kind of a cool picture. This, if you've been to the Moonville Cemetery, that's not what it looks like. That's what it looked like in 1977 when I took that picture and then went to the drugstore and got it developed, if you remember how to do that. And I somehow did not throw that away. But you can count probably 27 gravestones there. And I think if you go there now, you can count 5, maybe. Mother Nature is a problem, but vandalism is a much bigger problem. Because of the whole paranormal ghost component, the cemetery just kind of attracts some of the wrong crowd sometimes, and they're very disrespectful. There has been a monument built to that was just put there last year, to the Moonville Pioneers, which was very nice. That's a nice thing to see. I hope that's not destroyed, but I wonder about that also. So residents, I wanted to share this with you. Mrs. Coe, okay, so I'm this 19-year-old snot-nosed punk from Ohio State. I'm going around trying to talk to people, and I came across Mrs. Dirth, who is a descendant of the Coes. Mrs. Coe, when I met her, was 107 years old. She, unfortunately, at that age, she could not communicate. She was alive, but her daughter, who was a wonderful informant, she gave me a lot of information. I have her on tape. She was great. And Mrs. Coe is just an absolute classic. Her grandson had the foresight to make a recording of her when she was 99 years old. And I'm going to play it for you. This is just a 1-minute snippet. So you got to listen carefully, and I would encourage you to not listen so much to the words, but the dialect and her enthusiasm for how she kind of talks about the good old days, okay? It's only a minute, so bear with me so we can do this.
Always the Dahn train, about the Baptist church. If these crowds of us girls and boys are walking, and we hear them singing them old time hymns, and we sing right in the church singing all over. But they don't do that anymore. No.
You went to a lot of dancing too.
Oh yeah, we like to do that. Yeah. Well, now there ain't no harm in that. You can win and cut strips, hair, and fire, and nothing. Just to cut something by it, don't grab tails and crack it that. Now that's fun.
Now I know that wedding song. Where will the wedding supper be?
Where will the wedding supper be?
And she goes on to sing this whole song, which is great. The interview is about 15, 20 minutes long. And her grandson has the perfect interview voice. You notice that? He's really good at that. He has some really good questions, and this stuff is priceless. I have actually transcribed the entire thing, and in this book we're trying to write, it'll all be there. But to hear it is so much more special, that Irish Appalachian dialect that she had. And she talks about, well, the Bible don't speak again it, not against, again. And just some of the, she was very defiant that dancing was okay back then. We didn't cuss, strip, tear, or whatever she was going through. I love that thing. All right, the ghost, right? We can't do this without the ghost. So, all right. As I said, Moonville, compared to the other places around, was probably the least significant. But why do we know Moonville? Why are you here? Oh, I heard about it. And why have you heard about it? Probably because of the ghost. So where to start with this? In the studies I've been doing, there have been 33 deaths in and around the tunnel. Not like 100 yards within the tunnel, more like between Zaleski and Mineral. That's kind of the area of study that I do. And I'm not too sure where to go with this, where I went next. Hang on a minute. Oh, yeah, okay. All right. So whether you believe in ghosts or not, it certainly is part of Moonville lore. And what I can document from a historical standpoint are at least 33 deaths that I have copies from the newspaper here of each and every one. It might have been a paragraph, it might have been a sentence, it might have been, the journalism back then that's another talk for another day. It was a little bit sketchy at best. But there are others who are skeptical of the ghost, right? And I want to share with you, this is a 1-minute interview with a man named Maynard Thomas, who worked on the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad for 40 years, lived in Chillicothe, went through the Moonville Tunnel hundreds of times. And he was interviewed before his death when he was in his 90s. And this is just a 1 minute, so listen. This one you got to listen to. Now there's subtitles, so hopefully you can see this. Just saying. Okay. So there's that. Okay, that's good. And there's this. This is what I've been working on. This is, you don't have to read it necessarily, but there's 33 deaths that were in and around Moonville. So, I have the date of the death, the name, the source of the newspaper, the date it was in the newspaper, where it happened, sort of. Death by hanging, fell from bridge, suicide, rail accident, hit by train, death by burning, pretty much got them all. Coal mine accident, rail accidents, of course, are very common. Shot in the head, killed by a knife, okay. And then just a brief newspaper account. This will all be in the book that I'm writing. So, you have all these so who were the ghosts, right? You have all these contenders. There's a story about the headless brakeman, the headless brakeman, there's the lavender lady, there's the town bully. Those are the ghosts you read about, right? And it's like, okay, well, you got those three. Well, what about the other 30? And what are the rules to be a ghost, right? Some of you remember the movie Beetlejuice, and there was a guide to the dead or something like that. It reminded me of that. So, like, who gets to haunt on what night? How does this work, you know? You take Tuesdays, you take Thursdays. Oh, you were murdered, but you just died. You know, how does all this work? And I'm making fun. Until I wasn't making fun. And it occurred to me that, especially, sadly, the last one down there was 1978. And there was a young girl from Columbus who was actually on the rail trestle in Moonville, and she fell to her death. And, you know, that was too real to me, that those were, you know, they probably still live in Dublin, you know, the family and stuff. And all these other tragedies and the ghosts and the whole thing, these were real people. These were real people that died, that had real families. I want to show you this here. And, you know, you can find these graves around there with these tragedies. So I changed my tune from kind of making fun of the whole ghost thing, like, to, you know, these are real tragedies. And I came up with a name that I loved at the time called the Rail of Tears. The Rail of Tears, between Zaleski and Mineral. It's going to be known as the Rail of Tears. Great. I was real excited about it. Excited, and again, that word's probably the wrong word. But that's what I wanted to come up with. That's what I wanted to use for the book. That's why I wanted to give a name to all these tragedies that happened in this very short geographical area. And then it was pointed out to me that, you know, there may be some sensitivities there, if you're a historian, with the Trail of Tears that the Native Americans experienced back in the 19th century, which was a horrific, you know, march of death and a terrible thing. And I wasn't playing on words, but maybe I was without meaning to, you know, it was just kind of in the back of my mind, Trail of Tears, or whatever. My son, Garrett, who lives in California, pointed him out to me. He goes, Dad, you know, we stole their land, now you're trying to steal their tragedy. It's like, yeah, okay. Good point. We'll change the name. So I've kind of gone with Rail of Sorrows. But one of the ghosts is the bully that you'll read about. His name was David Keaton, and he is buried in the Keaton Cemetery, which sits above Lake Hope. He was a real person. Whether he's a real ghost or not was not clear. Ray Burritt was a young man, 19 years old, who worked in the Moonville coal mines, and they were doing that sort of like they build tunnels where they would light dynamite at the time and then run out and then go in and clean it up. That's what they mined. And he didn't make it out in time, and he was killed. So I guess the point of this is these are real people with real families and real stories and real sorrow. Whether they've become ghosts or not, you can decide for yourself. It's just amazing the number of people that were killed, again, in like a 7-mile stretch, which is not good. So to kind of conclude this and wrap this up, the railroad in the middle 1980s decided that they had no more use for it, and they came around and they pulled up all the tracks, at least in Vinton County. I'm pretty sure Athens County. I don't know how far towards Marietta they went, and they pulled up all the tracks. All the tracks, gone. And what's worse is they took the trestles and they took the bridges out. So if you know Raccoon Creek, it goes like this. It's like a snake. And then the railroad was obviously in a straight line. So, you know, trestle, gone. So you could only walk so far, and then you had to swim or walk across a log or figure out a way. It was rather kind of useless. So the Moonville Rail Trail, of which I am a member of, was founded in the early 2000s. And they started the project to try and put bridges in. And we put one bridge in. If you go to the Moonville parking lot, you can walk across the bridge that we put in. It was very expensive. The engineering, you know, the remoteness of the whole place was very expensive. But a couple years ago, through a grant of the ODNR and a Mining Restoration Act, we partnered with them, and they put 7 bridges in. The state of Ohio did, 7. So now you can walk from Moonville all the way to Mineral uninterrupted. You can walk, you can bike, you can hike, take a horse. And this was just kind of the building of the thing. They did really a nice job. There's a few more bridges that need to go in, and then the whole thing will be completed. Lastly, I'm writing a book. I'm co-authoring a book. It's what's funny to me about it is I got this I've not studied this for 47 years. Don't let me mislead you, but I've been doing it for a long time. Bits and pieces here or there, kind of, you can relate, Deanna, to what I'm saying. You just find stuff and but it's making me kind of get it together in some kind of form. Frankly, this talk has helped me it may not seem like it, but get it together a little bit because I kind of have stuff everywhere. But so we're working on that, and that's pretty much all I have.